Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 12th meeting, and also all the best for 2026 to those I haven't had the chance to speak to. Tonight's speaker needs very little introduction by me. Very popular with members. He has been several times before, and he's one of our go-to experts on the Middle East. I won't go through the whole of his biography. Many of you know it rather well. But Michael Stevens cut his teeth quite a few years with RUSI, the security founder think tank in London, and further afield. And as you can see, he's currently, amongst other things, a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. But also, in his practice, he's got clients like the Foreign Office and numerous NGOs. He obviously travels to the Middle East, but I do know he's also on aeroplanes to the United States, because somehow or other they seem to influence world events rather a lot. So without further ado, I'd just like to say, welcome back, Michael Stevens.
Thank you, Bill. It's fantastic to be back here. This is my third time in 8 years. When I started, Donald Trump had just come to power, and now he's just come back to power. So le plus ça change. Some of the themes, actually, I looked back through one of my old lectures and I realized I'd got it right. I'd predicted some things that would become true in the next 10 years, particularly the global disorder that we are experiencing. Many of you will have been following what's been going on with Greenland, with Davos, with Venezuela, with just about every country on the planet right now. We are going through a very, very difficult period of insecurity. And countries that have historically lived in an insecure environment, Saudi Arabia and Iran being just two of them, have now had to navigate not only an insecure region where you've seen 10 wars in the space of 30 years, but an insecure planet as well, which is making their own region even less secure. And one of the ways in which they have navigated that is actually to sit at the table. We will go through some of the history of the relationship between these two. Well, they were diametrically opposed enemies. One of the things that has changed since I first came to Keele World Affairs was I regularly spoke to Saudis who said to me, when are we going to invade Iran? Now that has completely changed, and we will go through tonight one of the reasons as to why those two countries are sitting at the table, talking, trying to work it out, trying to navigate through really the stormiest seas we have seen since the end of the Cold War. And I'm beginning to think it's the stormiest seas since the end of World War II. And God help them, God help us all, because it is a very complicated environment, and we are dealing with a very unpredictable man in the White House who unfortunately means that we are all playing a reactive game, trying to be strategic at the best of times when actually all we're doing is really making tactical decisions. So where are we now? Many of you will know and have been to lectures that have covered the problems that began in October the 7th, 2023, when Hamas broke through the border of Gaza and Israel and killed 1,200 Israelis. Since then, the region has been completely transformed. The way in which we think about security in the region has been transformed. What has happened? Well, there has essentially been a tension which was building up between Israel and Iran, which has broken out into open conflict. I was there in 2006 when Hezbollah launched an attack against Israel, and we saw a war then. And there have been multiple rounds of conflict between Israel and Hamas, but this time it really did spill out and essentially upended everything we understood. So what do we have now? Well, we have Iran's axis of power that it spent 30 years trying to build, lying in ruins. Hezbollah destroyed, almost the linchpin of insecurity in Lebanon, now struggling to stay relevant. Bashar al-Assad in Syria, collapsing in the space of 14 days. I'll let you in on a secret. I was advising a very, very senior US official on December the 2nd 2024. And I said, no way Bashar al-Assad will ever go. He is completely safe. 12 days later, he was running for Moscow, so what do I know? Then it's stretched all the way across to the Houthis in Yemen, who are currently embedded, yes, in the government of Yemen, but certainly not the force they once were. And of course, into Iran itself, where we have seen the first direct conflict between Middle Eastern states since Saddam in 1991. That is a big change of norms. Yes, there's a lot of conflict in the region. Yes, there was ISIS. Yes, there was Al-Qaeda. But countries did not go to war with one another in the region after Saddam attacked Kuwait in 1991. That has now happened. We have broken norms, and the shutters have been opened. We've been able to see what's actually going on inside the minds of Benjamin Netanyahu, Ayatollah Khamenei. They have de-escalated at the point where it really thought that it was going to go apocalyptic, which is a good thing, but I'm afraid to say a lot of those tensions have not been dealt with. They are still here today. And I'm afraid to say people's appetite for conflict and their risk tolerance is far lower than it used to be. And the likelihood of conflict breaking out again, I'm afraid once you break that taboo, it becomes a lot easier to do it the next time. So what's very interesting, of course, is that Mr. Netanyahu is really the primary actor and the most powerful leader in the region. I think we can all agree with that. It's not just because Israel has nuclear weapons. It's because they have, at every turn, dominated their foes in ways that we actually didn't expect the Israelis had that capacity to do, quite surprisingly. Many of you may have followed that incredible pager attack against all of Hezbollah operatives and the Mossad operation to get those pagers into Lebanon, and the use of AI to track human beings and their movements, and the way in which AI was able to pinpoint accurately where leaders were in Iran, in Syria, in Lebanon, and target them appropriately. Fascinating. Israel has changed the game in terms of tactical warfare. But for all those successes, when I last came here, I talked about, wouldn't the Arab world and Israel suddenly become friends? Weren't there many things that they agreed upon, principally Iran? They all agreed that Iran was a threat. Now they don't. Now Israel is seen as the threat. The alliances it was building up in the Gulf, particularly, seemed to be fraying with Bahrain. There was possibility of normalization with Saudi Arabia. October the 6th, 2023, I sat with a journalist from the New York Times. We talked about Palestinian elections and whether Hamas would win. And we talked about when Saudi Arabia would sign a peace deal with Israel. Boy, were we wrong. Everything has changed since then. And we frequently remind, in fact, he sent me a text 2 days ago saying, I'm coming back to London. What do you want to do? Because last time we sat and talked, we got everything wrong. What will we get wrong this time? I don't know, but I will let you know. We now have Saudi Arabia firmly seeing insecurity in the region as its opportunity to rise as the most important Arab country in the region. That is not just because it is geographically big, its population is big, it is also extremely rich, but it feels that now is the time to show leadership. It does help that the Saudis like Donald Trump and have his backing. Last but not least, we have splits opening up in the region between the Gulf states themselves as they try to navigate this period of insecurity. It did seem, whilst the war between Israel and Hamas was going on, that the Arab world had united. Now that that war has cooled down a little bit, some of the differences are becoming very, very clear indeed, and the way in which they are navigating global insecurity is driving neighbors directly into butting heads with one another, and we will talk about that later. So, where are we now? Yeah, it's been a difficult year. I've been very busy. I chose the right part of the world to be an expert in because I've always got something to do. I would hazard a guess that those people that were experts in Greenland were sitting around waiting for their moment. And now, all of a sudden, they've got their 15 minutes in the sun. Good for them. I get sort of 15 minutes off every week as opposed to 15 minutes on every 25 years. Right, where does this all come from? I've already hinted at this. Global change and the divisions in the world are fueling some of the insecurity you're seeing in the region. It is not just historical rivalries going back to the end of the First World War. This is really big stuff, and it is tectonic plates shifting right under these countries as they are trying to modernize, grow their economies, diversify from oil. And of course, you have plenty of experts that will come and talk to you about how rules and norms are being broken. Even within NATO, as we follow this Greenland debate, we can see that every day. The sorts of things that were unthinkable even 10 years ago are regularly talked about and said in open public today. The weakening of supranational institutions. The UN Security Council. When was the last time we had a really effective UN Security Council resolution that dealt with, or if it was signed into law, was ratified and enforced, that solved a problem in the Middle East region? I cannot think of one. The International Criminal Court is now under the attack or the gaze of the American MAGA movement, who say, frankly speaking, if you take Benjamin Netanyahu to court, we are going to sanction you, we're going to put tariffs on you, and by the way, anyone who deals with that court and recognizes its authority. These institutions that governed our world are being broken deliberately by the leaders of that world, who then complain when they don't get their own way. It's a very interesting time. So what do we have? Might makes right. It is true. We were unable to stop the Gaza conflict. Why? Because Israel was the more powerful actor and decided to continue that conflict. It had the backing of the United States, who allowed it to continue that conflict. Now, Hamas is still there. We can talk about Hamas later. And so the reasons for that conflict do continue. Yet, if you look at all the times international institutions tried to stop that conflict, they were essentially unsuccessful. The war in Yemen technically hasn't ended. The resolution which governs the removal of Houthis from the capital Sana'a and the reinstigation of the legitimate government is still in place and lies unenforced 10 years later. And that is because the states around these conflict zones are defining what happens in those conflict zones through the application of hard power. Yes, we can include AI and all sorts of new tools in that, but essentially, we are in a world where the strong do what they will and the weak do what they must. Last but not least, we have populist leaders, not only in the West, but also in the region. I would argue that Benjamin Netanyahu is a populist. I would argue that Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia is a populist. I would argue that Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey is a populist. The way in which they govern is short-term and tactical and completely defined by making decisions that keep people happy so that their own domestic situation does not spin against them. In some cases, it protects them from going to jail, particularly in the case of Mr. Netanyahu, but also Mr. Erdogan's party has frequently broken electoral law inside Turkey, and so winning elections or winning approval is seen as the right way to govern and not necessarily instigating correct policy. And so into that, you have the filtration of all these types of problems being manifested in a region which is already unstable and already insecure. Now, if you're Iran, you're looking at this world going, yeah, it's not good, is it? I would argue that the Iranians have played their part in making that region insecure, but let's just imagine that we're all the Ayatollah in Tehran for a second, okay? That's what the world looks like. This is a map of all the bases that surround Iran. Here's Iran, this is Iran, and these are all the places where the US has troops, okay? It is very frequently said in US popular discourse that regime change in Iran, bombing Iran, invading Iran is a legitimate option. If you are sitting in Tehran, you are constantly calculating about how to stay in power and how not to get invaded. If your world is surrounded by the one country that wants to invade you with somewhere in the region of between 60 to 80,000 troops, depending on the given day, at the moment you've got, I think, just under 50,000. In 2023, you see the number there at 58,000. You're going to feel worried. You're going to feel a sense of acute threat and existential, not dread necessarily, but existentialism clouds your thinking. The fact that the US is an empire that doesn't say it is bothers you. The Iranian Revolution in 1979 was about removing empire. So ideologically, the Iranians are sitting there already resisting this empire which keeps pushing against them and is going nowhere, by the way. These troops in Kuwait here, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE are not going anywhere. Those countries want those troops there. So what do you see? Well, we need allies, we need friends. Who do we have? They picked Bashar al-Assad in Syria. They created Hezbollah in Lebanon in 1982, following the Israeli invasion there. They subsidized the Houthis in Yemen. They sponsored non-state actors in Bahrain, and they have some very loyal Shia militias operating in this part of Iraq, who are essentially funded, trained, and armed by Iran. Until October the 7th, 2023, that was all looking pretty good for Iran. They'd managed to surround Israel to its north and its south. They had managed to surround their rival Saudi Arabia to its north and its south, and even at one point to its east. And they were doing pretty well because these non-state actors were never enough to get all these troops steaming across the border into Iran and invading. What changed was the fact that Israel said, enough. We're going on the offensive. We've had enough of this insecure imbalance. Obviously, as you know, Israel is a country the size of Wales. It cannot withstand missile barrages for very long before its major population centers are hit. And so Mr. Netanyahu, knowing the tools that he had at his disposal and trying to regain some legitimacy after being the prime minister under which that attack occurred, went on the offensive. Their allies have been destroyed. They are now in a critical moment of weakness. They are incredibly vulnerable, and they went toe-to-toe with Israel for the first time during the 12-day war in the summer of 2025. Did they win? No, but they didn't lose. The problem is that Israel very precisely targeted all their air defense systems. Iranian skies are essentially open for business. You can fly any aircraft you want in, target anyone you want, and get out without the risk of being shot down. We saw that with Operation Midnight Hammer, where President Trump ordered in B-2s to bomb some of Iran's deeply buried nuclear facilities at Fordo. So Iran feels very worried. They feel like their leaders are all on the menu, and there have been targeted assassinations of some of their Revolutionary Guard corps. And on top of that, they're trying to predict what will happen next. The problem is that they're trying to predict President Trump. Very difficult. If you are scared, insecure, you kind of lost a war to your big rival in the region, you are likely to do something that feels irrational and strike out, a bit like if you back a cat into a corner. It puffs itself up and tries to fight back, even if the thing it's fighting is twice the size of it. That is what worries me about Iran in today's environment, is that the strategic threat against it is so severe that it may do something which actually precipitates a far larger conflict, simply because it is in such a weak position and it cannot accurately make risk calculations with its enemies. It used to be, we would talk about ladders of escalation, right? It's a bit like the Cold War, but between states. If Hezbollah shoots this missile, Israel fires this missile back. If Hezbollah kills 2 troops, Israel kills 5. Then Hezbollah kills 5, and then everybody stops. We don't have that anymore. We don't have those rules. They don't exist. Escalation, and if you like, rational choice thinking that dominates that type of escalation calculation is gone. So if you're Iran, you are in real trouble, because there is no way for you to understand when the next threat is coming round the door. So what have they done? Well, there is hope. It's very interesting. They've got new friends. What is this picture? This picture is the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike in Doha in September 2025. The Israelis made, I think, their biggest strategic mistake by doing this. Why? Because Qatar is very rich and gave Donald Trump $500 million plane, and he likes them. But secondly, because Doha is a strategic asset, not just for the US, but for the United Kingdom, and is seen as a kind of outpost of Western defense. The Gulf states suddenly looked at Israel and went, hang on a second, we thought Iran was the main threat. You just came through our multi-billion-dollar air defense systems and bombed a GCC, a Gulf Cooperation Council country, and didn't warn anyone. You didn't even bother to tell anyone that it was happening. Who's the real threat here? Is it Iran? They haven't actually attacked us for a few years at least, but there is one country that has attacked us, and it's Israel. Oh, and by the way, we're upset about the Palestinian question again. It's interesting. The Gulf states forgot that the Palestinians were important until 2023, then suddenly remembered that actually Arab solidarity was a real thing. I think it might be a bit disingenuous, but nevertheless, facts are that there is a unitary moment, I think, amongst not just Arab countries, but Islamic countries in the region, where they see the Palestinian cause as a mobilizing factor for them, and they see Iran as a potential friend in that. So what happened? Saudi Arabia was deeply upset by this airstrike. They phoned up President Trump and demanded that he tell Prime Minister Netanyahu to stop. That is what Trump did. The Israelis threatened to do it again, and Trump, in his usual way, started leaking nasty stories about Benjamin Netanyahu and criticizing him in the media. Mr. Netanyahu stopped. And it was very interesting, that moment, because it was the first time that we saw the Gulf states essentially coming together and having more influence on Donald Trump than the Israelis were able to have. Not only that, it made them think, well, what can we do about this? Can we really trust the Americans if they didn't warn us that there was an attack coming? Maybe they didn't know, but the Americans claim they didn't know. But the Gulf states said, nevertheless, this isn't going to work. We have to start looking to our strategic environment and making sure that there are no new threats. And so the Gulf states looked at this and went, the only country right now which changes the status quo, and bear in mind, these are conservative monarchies. Conservative monarchies exist in a world in which they control change. They are highly autocratic. Anything that happens within their countries is managed and controlled and assigned budgets and assigned influence through 3 or 4 men. It's always men. What was happening was that all of a sudden the region was changing beyond their control. They used to blame Iran for that change. Now they blamed Israel. So what did they do? Well, they started thinking, hang on a second, we're running out of oil. The world is getting really insecure, and we actually want to change the way in which we do business. We don't want to be these closed, austere Sunni Muslim states that people think that you can't drink and women can't drive and all the rest of it. Saudi Arabia being the kind of archetypal example of this. And they turned around, and over the last 10 years, have been trying desperately to diversify their economy. They've tried to become centers of tourism. They've tried to become cultural inflection points in the region. It used to be, of course, if you grew up in the Middle East in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, it was Egypt, Damascus, and Baghdad that were the centers of intellectual output in the Arab world. Now it is Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Doha, Qatar, and Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. What have they done? Well, they've got people like Cristiano Ronaldo to come play football there. They've paid him a king's ransom to do it, but the point is they're trying to change their image. What they're trying to do is to build a reputation whereby in a world in which oil is either very cheap because of oversupply in the market, and there will probably be more oversupply if Donald Trump gets his hands on Venezuela, well, how are they going to survive? If oil is at $60 a barrel and to balance their budgets, they need $80, $90, $100 a barrel. You have to start changing. And so that's what they've done. And what they've all tried to do is become these centers of cultural output. So you've seen World Cup 2022 was hosted in Qatar. There will be another World Cup in 2034. Clearly, Mr. Ronaldo here is going to be a huge part of that push. But the point is to get people into these countries, to spend money. You have to change. It is as simple as that. I was in Qatar when they were having this debate about whether you could drink alcohol. As it happened, they banned alcohol from stadiums. Violence went way down. I can't think why. But they did have controlled areas where people could drink alcohol. I grew up in Qatar in the early 90s. There was no such thing as alcohol apart from in the basement of the British Embassy. So if you think about this, these are huge social and political changes that they're going through. But it doesn't help if there's war everywhere. Nobody wants to come and spend money and play football in your country if you're getting bombed all the time, or your airspace is being used for Israeli overflights into Iran, and Iran is sending missiles back. I had a friend, actually, who was on just a civilian flight in Saudi Arabia, who literally recorded out the window 30 Iranian Scud missiles, just about 100 miles away, just going across the sky towards Israel. Incredible. I wouldn't get in a plane if that was happening, let's put it that way. So my point is this, is that reputationally, the Gulf states cannot stand a world which is governed by conflict. It doesn't work for them economically. They won't survive the change into the fourth industrial age. So what you see now is essentially a shift towards keeping the peace, trying to make sure that there isn't conflict on your borders, trying to make sure that you don't have a conflict with Iran. All of a sudden, there's a conflict with Iran. So this explains a lot of why they have tried to manage this problem. Let's look at Saudi Arabia as it faces the world today. Iraq, really quiet place. Not great. That's on their northern border. Israel and Palestine, just to the northwest, been at war for 2 years. Iran to the right, missiles moving over there. Guess what? Sudan, in the middle of a civil war where you have hundreds of thousands of people dying. Yemen has not had a day of peace since it reunified in 1994. Ethiopia, if you follow the Tigray conflict, it is the bloodiest conflict of the 21st century. No one talks about this. I don't know why they don't talk about the Tigray conflict. But essentially, Ethiopia has experienced the bloodiest conflict of the 21st century. Somalia, still conflicts, and still Islamist militias running around at will in some cities. And you have a breakaway province there of Somaliland, just to the northwest there. So if you're looking at the world as Saudi Arabia, and you've got Cristiano Ronaldo, and you've got that, it's 2 and 2 are making not even 5, they're making about 87. How do you manage this insecure environment where everywhere you look there is insecurity? The problem is that wherever these two are going at it, your reputation sinks by the day, and it just doesn't work for who they are and what they want to be. So does this mean that the Saudis have suddenly become best friends with their worst enemies, the Iranians? I don't think so, but needs must. And I think what you're finding today is that essentially they're not enemies. And the first time I came and spoke to you, back in I think 2018, I would never have envisaged this scenario where China actually brought them together for their first set of talks in 2023. Which were brokered secretly by Oman and the United States. But this process has been going pretty fast. So what you see now, the conflict that could have broken out, and in fact, in 2019, Iran did bomb Saudi oil facilities directly. They pretended it was the Iraqis, but it wasn't. It was Iran. They attacked Saudi Arabia. They bombed them repeatedly. The drones that were discovered were Iranian drones. They were not flown from Iraq. And now they're shaking hands. The chances of that conflict breaking out again are very low, and I think this is probably the biggest strategic shift that we have seen in the region as a result of all the insecurity that you've seen as a product of October 7th, 2023, but not only that, the wild levels of insecurity that have emerged since the Trump 2 administration. In fact, actually the Trump 1 administration and beyond. It's interesting. If I go back 10 years ago, and by the way, there's an Instagram trend at the moment for us really old millennials that are getting into middle age, where we're uploading loads of things of what we did in 2016. So I'm just going to do this in my own way. I don't upload to Instagram, partly because I'm an older millennial and I can't work out how to do it. But in 2016, I remember sitting in Riyadh. The Saudis told me that if this Iranian nuclear enrichment program keeps going, they will go for nuclear weapons, no matter what. I said, well, you're going to have a problem with the Americans there, but I get what you're saying. I said, what is your preferred goal for Iran? What do you want? Maximum sanctions. I want the regime on its knees, breaking. I want revolution everywhere in Iran, and I want them to come begging to us for a peace deal. No nuclear agreement. What Obama did let us down and was almost US treason to the Gulf states. 10 years ago, that was the conversation. They were not begging us to invade, of course they weren't, but they would have been not opposed to it had that happened. Well, the funny thing is if you look at Iran in 2026, that's basically where it is. It is under maximum sanctions. Its population is rising up. It is incredibly weak. It has been attacked by Israel. It has no air defense system. And now the Saudis are saying, whoa, 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 no, actually, that's not what we wanted. So that is what has happened in the space of a decade. The big war that we all worried about, all the conditions for it to happen are here, and it's not happening. So what do we think now? Saudi Arabia is looking across at Iran and thinking, well, This is very, very worrying indeed. And I want to go into why I think this is so worrying by talking about what Iran is, for those of you that don't spend your days looking at it. So in order to understand why what happened in late 2025 and the beginning of January was so important, you have to understand how Iran functions. What I just want to take you through on this slide is anything you see in blue is elected, okay? People vote in Iran, and they vote quite regularly. And there are various levers of power inside Iran which are accountable to the people. Yes, they are chosen by the system in the sense that you cannot be a down with the regime radical and expect to be elected. But nevertheless, there is popular choice. However, the real power in Iran still lies with the clerics. At the top is Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. You then have the Expedience Council, which essentially is mostly clerics, mostly appointed by the Supreme Leader, in fact, all approved, at least approved by the Supreme Leader, who sort of act as a kind of go-between. And then you have what is called the Guardian Council. Now, these are his 12 closest allies, all clerics, all religious, all fiercely loyal to the revolution and the Islamic Republic. And they are the main people that hold the power. Ultimately, they control the black budgets, they control the security agencies, and the president, that is the old president there, that is now changed, has some authority, some legislative power, and can, of course, run the country, can manage the economy. But when it comes to the big things, the president is the one who takes the orders from the Guardian Council and from the Supreme Leader, and that will never change. Not while this system is in power. So there is the illusion of choice, but there is in reality no freedom when it comes to the basic idea of what system you want to govern you in Iran. And I will come back to this point to explain why the protests are so important. This is just digging deeper into the command structure. The security agencies in Iran. Let's have a look quickly at who answers to who. So Ebrahim Raisi has now died in a helicopter crash about 18 months ago. There is a new president. So the Supreme Leader essentially has the Supreme National Security Council answers directly to him. The president indirectly replies and answers to him. The intelligence organizations of the Iran Revolutionary Guard answer directly to Ayatollah Khamenei. Do they answer to the president? No, they do not. All the major power centers, all the intelligence flows upwards into the Supreme Leader, and it ends with him. The president, current president Pezeshkian, may have some influence. He may be able to influence some thinking. He may be able to go to the outside world and manage relations with them. But ultimately, it comes up to this 87-year-old man who is and has been in power since 1989. So how serious are these protests? I mean, they are pretty serious. In my view, they are the most serious protests since 1979 in Iran. Why do I think that? Well, this was a mass movement, and it didn't start because people were asking for political change. I think this is the important thing to note. Iranians are, yes, unhappy with the regime. Yes, some women don't want to wear hijab. They want to live in a freer country which is socially more relaxed. That's not why they came out onto the streets this time. They came out onto the streets this time because the Iranian regime is not managing the country well. Very simple, right? It's the economy stupid, Bill Clinton. It's the same in any country wherever you go. What has happened? You have 42% inflation at the moment. The Iranian rial is collapsing. 10 years ago, let's go back to 2016. I like 2016. 39,000 Iranian rials to the dollar. 2026, 1.4 million. That is some serious inflation. If you're trying to buy a loaf of bread under that type of circumstance, it becomes extremely difficult. The point I'm trying to make is it's the everyday stuff the regime is getting wrong at the moment. Bare shelves. It looks like something out of the former Soviet Union in the last days. People cannot afford basic goods and services, but you can if you have access to the black market. Who controls the black market? It's these guys. These guys. It's all the security agencies that are importing the Mercedes-Benzes. Loads of people in Iran have an iPhone. How is that possible? They're under sanctions. It's because the IRGC smuggles them in. And they control that economy. They control all the black levers of the economy. A lot of that is through Dubai, a lot of it is through trucking to Iraq, some of it is through other border countries. But essentially, the security agencies have locked themselves in to the economy and cannot be separated from it. So, why are people then so angry? Because they are struggling on their everyday basic points of life, and the people with all the stuff at the top are the people who are also politically repressing them. It's quite a simple equation when you come down to it. So, what happened? Well, on the 28th of December, the currency traders and the guys in the market stalls, they're called the adversaries, the people in the markets, came out and protested against the economic circumstances in the country. It had got to the point where they could not afford to import basic goods. If you can't afford to import basic goods, you cannot sell them on, which means you have no way to make a living. So this started with the merchant class, but it didn't stay there for long. Very, very quickly, what happened was that you had particularly Gen Z, the students, coming out and saying, we've had enough. This isn't working for us. I don't have a job. I can't afford my rent. And even if I did have a job, by the time I get paid a salary, it's worth half of what it was the day before, and I can't afford my rent again. What is the point? I give up. I've had enough. I don't believe this regime can give me what I want. That is boom time, okay? When you have a critical mass of people sitting there going, this regime cannot succeed. It was really interesting. I spoke to an Iranian about this, and he goes, what you have to understand, Mike, 1979 and the revolution then was about hope. 2026 is about exhaustion. We are fed up. We are tired. We have had enough. People don't believe in this system. That doesn't mean that the regime doesn't have loyalists. It does. There are several million conservative, religious Iranians who do support the regime and, by the way, have protested in favor of it. It is not the case that every single person in Iran wants the fall of this regime. And that also is what makes it so resilient, by the way. But I want to come back to my point about why I think this is so serious. They've lost the middle class, they've lost the intelligentsia, and now they've lost the millennials and Gen Z. There is just no mass support base for the regime. And let's be perfectly honest, even if they had the world's best economist at their helm, 42% inflation and rising is a pretty difficult problem to solve without further economic pain coming down the line. So this is a systemic failure of the Islamic Republic. The analytical community generally is of the belief that this is the beginning of the end. Does not mean that it will end tomorrow. I want to say this very clearly. When I say beginning of the end, bear in mind people have been predicting the end of the Islamic Republic since it was formed in 1979. It is still here, despite the sanctions, the wars, and the insecurity. I'm not saying tomorrow you will see the collapse of the Ayatollah, and then what will of course happen is tomorrow the Ayatollah will collapse. But what I'm saying here is that I think, look at this bottom line, okay? People are angry, fed up, and don't believe the regime can provide them with what they need. Game over. Game over. How do you do? Okay, go pray. But I can't afford bread, right? God speaks to the supreme leader and gives him divine rule on earth. I can't afford bread. My mum is sick and I can't get medicine, and I couldn't for the last 6 months, right? That is, I think, where we're at. So what is happening now? Well, I'm afraid, as we stand here today, and bear in mind the regime has cut the internet in many parts of the country for several days now, but it does look like the regime got away with it. It does look, I'm afraid to say, that they shot their way out of this problem. So, we think, we cannot confirm, but we think over 16,000 people were killed. Not good. The regime has even admitted that several thousand have been killed. Just want to put a point of context. Remember Bashar al-Assad in Syria and that horrid war? It took them 6 months to get to 5,000 people. So when you contextualize that and that terrible war that engulfed Syria for over a decade, 16,000 people in the space of 3 weeks is really some severe repression. And we hear some horror stories. We really do. We hear stories of loved ones going to the morgues to pick up their brother, their husband, their daughter, their son, and being asked to pay the equivalent of $4,000 to $5,000 to release that body for burial. The regime is not only killing people, it is kicking sand in the faces of those that are grieving and trying to make money from it. This is an Islamic republic which has fundamentally been corrupted by those in power at the top, controlling all access to finances. So we're even at the point now where the supreme leader can't hide this. Why? Because in the times where Starlink has been working in some parts of Iran, we've had some very brave citizen journalists smuggling out pictures. We can see that the pictures from the morgues, from the streets, indicate that the casualty rate is significantly higher than the regime is even admitting, and they cannot deny this. To begin with, actually, their reaction was fairly moderate. They agreed that there were legitimate reasons for protest, and then in about end of week 2, beginning of week 3, they turned on the repression. And that came from the supreme leader who said, we've had enough. They're all foreign terrorists. This is all the work of the Jews and the Americans and the great imperialists. Start shooting now. And that is what's happened. So what do we have? Gatherings of more than 3 people are broken up immediately by regime gangs. They're called the Besiege. The Besiege is essentially a citizen militia, which is controlled by the Revolutionary Guard and is brought out to break up any unrest that it deems fit. And of course, this is what they have been instructed to do. The internet is turned on and off sporadically so that people can't communicate. And if you insinuate in any way that you're involved in a protest, of course, they monitor the internet. So you will then be tracked to your IP address or to your phone, and you will be arrested. In some instances, those people that are believed to have been instigators of protests have been lined up for execution. We believe, at current writing, that 800 people are awaiting execution as a result of this. So the regime has turned the screw pretty hard. Protests seem to have died down. Again, it's difficult to know if it's entirely true because there is not full coverage and we're not able to see inside every city or town. But essentially what the regime has done extremely well is prevented organized opposition, organized political gatherings, and the chance of any type of coalescing around some sort of political alternative. They have shut that down, and they are extremely good at it. Why? Because they learned from their own revolution in '79. They knew what the dangers to them at that time were, and the dangers to the Shah were, and they have been ruthless at stamping them out, and they are getting better at using technology to do it. I want to just come back to that point about the beginning of the end. So let's look at 4 possible trajectories. I am not a prophet, surely not, but I cannot see into the future, and I get asked this question a lot, what is going to happen in Iran? I don't know. What I can give you are likely scenarios, and possibly give you what I think is more likely to happen than others. So bear in mind what I said. The Ayatollah is 87, and he will either have to step down because of ill health, or he may die. I mean, he is not young. So we may have essentially what I call a Pope scenario, a John Paul II scenario, where you have a conservative institution that does not want to change. What they do is essentially appoint someone that looks and sounds an awful lot like the guy before. So if you remember what the Catholic Church did, they brought in Benedict XVI, who was essentially a social conservative who didn't change many things that John Paul II believed in. Now, I don't know if there's a Pope Francis waiting in the Islamic Republic. I hope there is. But actually, in my experience of studying Iran, every time there was a Pope Francis type figure, they eventually got jailed. Right? The clerics that were the liberalizing reformist clerics almost invariably come to power and lose power because Khamenei believes that, a bit like Nigel Farage, if you get too big for your boots, you get cut. So that is how he stays in power, and also how he prevents religious opposition to his rule, which is the main threat to it. I think this is probably the most likely scenario, that they will try and play for time. What I think it will do is buy them maybe 4 or 5 years. But the point is, I want to make something clear from point 1, okay? Which is that change is coming to Iran, whether they shoot protesters or they don't shoot protesters. The supreme leader has been in power since 1989. Most Iranians, the majority of Iranians, are too young to remember what that was like. They don't even remember the Ayatollah Khomeini, who led the Islamic Revolution in '79. They're too young to remember that. They have never known a world, a bit like I never knew a world without Queen Elizabeth II. So this is, in my view, the way in which the regime buys itself time, tries to think about what to do next, and does not allow the biggest threat internally to displace it. The next one is the suppression and succession scenario. What do I mean by that? The clerics are not the ones doing the shooting. The clerics are ordering regime loyalists in the Revolutionary Guard Corps, in the besieged, to do the shooting. That gives the people who are doing the shooting a lot of power, and they are able to essentially determine who succeeds Khamenei, and they are then able to turn the state into a more militarized, more aggressive, more messianic society. And because military are effectively in power in this scenario, the Islamic Republic turns into something very, very much more dangerous than it did previously. At least with Ayatollah Khamenei, he was considered, or is considered, quite a slow-thinking, rational calculator who isn't rushed into decisions when he's not comfortable making them. What this purports is a suppression scenario where the regime believes that suppression works and rewards those who do the suppressing, which leads to a more militant and, if you like, dangerous Iran. I think this could be very possible if we see another uprising in the next 12 to 18 months. I do believe that the clerics lose influence as opposed to the Revolutionary Guard Corps. The next one is the kind of Bashar al-Assad scenario, which is get on a plane and simply run. What does that mean? Well, in the Syria scenario, you had a member of al-Qaeda that became the leader of the country, and Donald Trump likes him, says he's a very tough guy. Maybe that can work out well for Iran too. Maybe you can have a reformed, religious, messianic fanatic suddenly realizing that actually the way forward is to engage with the world rather than isolation. After all, the leader of Syria has done that. He was a member of al-Qaeda and has engaged with the outside world. Alternatively, it could mean utter chaos. It could mean that essentially the country fragments into a Kurdish part, into an Azeri part, into a Baluchi part, militias spring up everywhere, and it descends into all-out civil war. That is possible. I don't see it happening right now. But in this scenario, I'm afraid to say again, I think the guys with the guns win. I really do. Because, go back to what I said, there are no organized opposition groups inside Iran. The only organized group is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are the only ones with the weapons, and as long as the army does not stand up against them, which it didn't this time, and by the way, the army stayed in barracks in 1979, which led to the fall of the Shah. This time, the army did not stay in barracks. The army participated in repressing protesters. So, in this scenario, I'm afraid to say I think we end up with a very dangerous Iran. Possibly fragmented, yes, possibly weaker, but I'm afraid that ideational core remains. Last one, the uprising scenario where the protesters win. It's not impossible, right? There is a famous report from a British ambassador in Tehran, Sir Anthony Parsons. Those of us that study Middle East studies and study British interest in the Middle East have read his telegrams and tried to stop ourselves from being an Anthony Parsons. As you have already discovered, I have made several wrong calls and been myself as bad as Anthony Parsons. He wrote in the middle of the summer of 1979 that there was no chance that the Shah of Iran would fall. Within 3 months, he was gone. That does not mean necessarily a good ending or a bad ending. What we know is that the last revolution, where there was a popular uprising, led to the Islamic Republic of Iran and this revolutionary state. It could mean that we have something that is a bit more liberal. It seems to me that what the public is asking for, bear in mind there are over 90 million people in Iran, we can't count them all, but it does seem that what they would prefer would be something less messianic, less religious, less repressive. So, in this scenario where the protesters win, yes, there will be jockeying. Yes, there will be political parties stabbing each other in the back. What's new in politics? But my point here is that there is the option for this to end well. Unfortunately, I think this is the least likely scenario. And I go back to my initial point is, if I was to be given a likelihood scale, I think we're going to see number one, the regime will play for time. But go back to my original slide where I said people had lost hope. It won't buy them much time. It won't buy them much time, and certainly not from a religious legitimacy point of view. So that's just something for you to all bear in mind when you're thinking about questions to ask me. Please don't ask me to predict. I'm trying my best to give that to you now. Okay, so what external factors should we consider? Everyone know who the guy is on the left? That is the son of the Shah, who lives in Los Angeles. He's called Reza Pahlavi, and he lives a very nice life, actually, and has some good friends in the US Congress. He has some good friends in the Israeli parliament as well, and is pushing very hard at the moment to be the solution to the problem. Now, given that his father was a repressive autocrat, I really hope that his solution to the problem is not to be a repressive autocrat. What he is saying is, no, I don't want power. What I want is to just be a uniting figure. I will come back, I will hold the fort together, and then we can have elections. I'll believe it when I see it. Okay? I believe it when I see it. And by the way, Iranians will believe that when they see it. The problem is, and if you are following Iran closely, some of you have been watching the news every day, I am sure. Some of you will have seen this flag with the lion in the background, the flag of the Shah. Some of you will have even seen interviews with Reza Pahlavi, who speaks extremely good English, is very eloquent indeed. Most Iranians haven't seen those interviews. Most Iranians don't know what he's like. Most Iranians point out the mistakes he makes when he speaks Persian. And they don't feel that he is really relevant to them or their struggle. You have a mansion in Los Angeles. My brother just got shot by the regime and is in the morgue. Why would you come back and represent me? You don't represent anything that I've been through. We saw something similar, actually, in the first Intifada with the Palestinians in the late 80s, where the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was based in Tunis, tried to tell young Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza what to do. And they said, hang on a second, you're not the ones getting beaten up and put in jail. You're living in Tunisia. You're having a great time. Go away, right? And Arafat's grip on the Palestinians actually began to loosen from that point onwards. I think that this is very, in my view, a very tenuous scenario in which this external actor backed by the United States can come sweeping into Iran, solve all the problems. Look, the diaspora in Iran is very effective at raising money. They are very effective at making sure all of you know how serious the problem in Iran is. What they're not very effective at is legitimacy in their own country. And I think what's fair to say is when you see these actors in the Iranian diaspora talking about Iran, it's not that their opinion is illegitimate. They are Iranians. They have family in Iran. But they're not the only Iranians that have a voice. They just happen to have access to a TV channel and lots of money. Okay? So I just caution people when they say, oh, I met this lovely Iranian, and he says the following: which Iranian did you meet? Okay? So just for your own sort of balanced assessment of a very complicated country, there's a lot of noise filling the airways from the diaspora. Just play that down a little bit and try and listen to what Iranians in Iran are actually saying. The next are the regional actors. I mean, Israel is really important here because it can assassinate Iranian officials at will, and has done. There's been incredible leaks from the Mossad. I saw one where the Mossad leaked a phone call from an Israeli agent to an IRGC commander in perfect Persian saying, are you going to go back to your house now? It'd be a shame if you didn't, because we know what road you're walking down, said the road. We love your blue car, said what the car number plate was. Essentially, you have a choice. Go now or die. And that suddenly really was a wake-up call for the Iranians. They were completely penetrated by Mossad and by the CIA. I just want to point that out, that Israel and the US do have a lever they can play if they choose to play it. And they've done it incredibly effectively, I might add. And the Iranians, by the way, after these assassinations took place and the 12-day war happened, spent about 5 months just purging their security forces. They didn't make the news, but hundreds of people were lined up and summarily executed for being traitors. Many probably weren't. And the Iranians are so penetrated that it may well be that the people doing the purging were themselves the traitors. We actually don't know. The scale of Mossad penetration into Iran is very impressive indeed from a tactical point of view. I need to move on. So what I want to say quickly is these guys at the right here. We talk about Russia and China a lot in the context of Greenland, in the context of global insecurity. What's interesting is that both of them see Iran as a useful ally and would dearly love for the Islamic Republic to win this current round of instability against its own people. And partly because they themselves are autocrats, and I'm sure they wouldn't want to give anyone any ideas. But it's more than that, isn't it? Iran helps out in Ukraine. It sends drones to kill Ukrainians. And China imports somewhere in the region of 1 to 2 million barrels from Iran. So its energy needs are very, very much tied to both Saudi Arabia and Iran. So they would absolutely not want to see a collapse scenario. The problem is they're not America, they're not Israel. They do not have that grip inside the system, and they will be passive observers to events. I just want to talk quickly about how people are reacting to this, and then I'll wrap it up. Clearly, Saudi, UAE, and Qatar have had a pretty terrible year in terms of their national security, which has been essentially violated at will by regional actors, supported by a president with whom they have spent billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars trying to keep on side. Many of you will have noticed that Trump went to the Gulf. His first visit in Trump 1 and 2 was to these 3 countries, both times. And they've promised him hundreds of billions. In fact, they've promised trillions of dollars, but none of them can actually afford that. Nevertheless, it is important to note that they have tried to buy Trump's loyalty. They didn't get that. They're very unhappy about it. And now they're squabbling with each other about how to deal with it. The Gulf countries will keep Trump engaged if they feel that he is not paying attention to Iran or to their national security needs. They will get on the phone, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will pick up, or Steve Witkoff, his envoy in the region, will pick up. They have that access, and they have shown an ability to do business with Trump that is quite unlike almost any other countries on earth. And he really likes them, partly because they make him feel important, and they live in big gold palaces like he wants to live in. There's a clear preference for stability in Iran. They don't want regime collapse. This has completely changed. I think we've covered this point. But the world is changing. And they're going to have to make some really, really tough choices about how to navigate that world. Do they, for instance, with this insecure, unpredictable Mr. Trump, start turning more to China? What about Russia if it becomes successful in Ukraine and the Europeans are kind of pushed back into this small enclave in Western Europe? How do they balance that? What about the role of India? Do they start looking at the new world order and the big powers and spending their money there in the way that they're spending it with Mr. Trump? What about spending it in Iran? What about making Iran look more like them? These are all options that the Gulf states have on the table. They have the resources to do it. But the point is, if they're going to do it, they have to do it now, because in 10 years' time, the money is going to start running out. And I think this is crucial. We're at such a period of instability that being the quiet guy in the corner, watching everything that's going on, when you're trying to diversify your economy, when you're trying to stop selling oil as your main revenue, it's just not going to work. They have to get up and they have to get active. That's exactly what they're doing, and it's exactly why they're disagreeing with one another, because they don't agree what that looks like. So, if you want to ask me any more questions, we have plenty of time in the Q&A. I can talk about what they're doing in Africa. I can talk about artificial intelligence, which is a huge battle in the Gulf, and where they are definitely trying to choose between China and the United States. And I can talk more about President Trump. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let's crack on with the Q&A. Lots of questions, not surprisingly stimulated by that impressive talk from Michael. There's one topic you didn't actually touch on, so I've got a couple of questions about it, so some brief thoughts. So, Jan Ferguson, what is the role of Islam in all this? And Bruce Beard, is Iran a republic or a theocracy? Because if it's the latter, do you know of one that has ended well? So just a little, is it all about politics? Or where does... And of course, we know there's a Shia and Sunni divide as well, which we didn't talk about, because there's that sort of talk. But could you help people tune into the religious dimension?
Well, the two questions kind of answer each other in the sense that where does politics start and religion begin? If you are Ayatollah Khamenei, they are the same. There is no division. When I first started in this career, I was incredibly interested by Shiism and the brand of Shiism promoted by the Islamic Republic, and the notion that the Ayatollah is the voice of God on earth, essentially, and the concept of Vilayat al-Faqih, which is the guardian of the jurisprudence. It's this system whereby the man at the top with the knowledge, sort of Plato's philosopher king, rules in the interests of all, for those in power and those in the revolutionary guard. There is no difference. They are messianic in their ideology, and in order to progress in your career in the Islamic Republic, you cannot simply be atheist or secular. Now, I would say this, the area of the world where atheism is actually growing fastest is Saudi Arabia, funnily enough. The home of the two holy mosques, where the king of Saudi Arabia is actually called the Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifin, the custodian of the two holy places. And a lot of Saudis, I can tell you now, are not very good Muslims. I had a very bad hangover in Saudi Arabia once, thanks to a good Saudi friend of mine who had a very good stock of red wine. So the answer to the question is, for this Islamic Republic, I don't see the difference. But politics is the art of the possible. It's money, it's power, it's patronage, and those things all happen whether you are religious or not. It's about your legitimacy, and if you want my honest opinion, the reason that they shoot protesters and they will keep fighting and they will not go down like Bashar al-Assad is because of that religious element. Bashar's power base, essentially melted away underneath him because familial ties kept him in power, yes, but ultimately there was no one in the security services that believed in him anymore. If you're protecting a regime that is God's will on earth, it's a bit of a different concept, isn't it? You are going to fight. And by the way, one of the things I found when I lived in Israel for many years, the religious units in Israel are much better than the secular ones because they tend to be far better at absorbing risk and fighting, and because they believe in what they're doing and they believe in why they're doing what they're doing. And so what you find that the toughest units in Israel tend to be the religious units. Now, to say that this is all about Islam, well, the region is inherently, yes, religious. I would never go through Iraq and tell people I was an atheist. That would have made me deeply unpopular and probably a source of suspicion. So I do, every now and then, if I want to have a reasonable conversation with a Qatari or maybe a religious Lebanese person or a religious Iraqi, I ask them about what they think about God. And I usually get a 30-minute answer, and they're passionate about it. And by the way, young people are passionate about their belief in God. So I don't dismiss it, and I would certainly never denigrate the role of religion in people's lives. But I come back to this point about the religion itself. Saudi Arabia has managed to divorce Mohammed bin Salman's power from God. Iran has not. Mohammed bin Salman does believe this is about the economy. He does believe this is about good governance, even as he has become more autocratic. The man in the chair in Iran who is twice Mohammed bin Salman's age does not believe that.
Let's talk about an area that you discussed, and it's to do with Israel, and it's to do with Hamas. So there's three questions here, and I'd just like you to just take a few bounce out of them. So Jeff Elliott, how is Israeli military intelligence dominance financed? John Sherwood, as Mossad is noted as one of the best secret services, is it credible to believe they didn't know about the October the 7th massacre?
Oh.
And
okay.
Mike Williams, given the unpopularity of the supreme leader, both within Iran and without, and the reach of his enemies, why has he not been assassinated? So I know they're all different questions, but they're all about, they really are homing in on Mossad.
So you mean
say a little bit about it.
Assassinated by Mossad? You mean?
Well, Mike doesn't say that, but I think that he's hinting that if anyone's going to bump him off, they would.
Well,
they'd be the best place to do it.
Yeah.
And yet they failed on October the 7th.
Yeah, and the answer is that there was a conversation about whether to do that in Israel. They did know where he lived, and there are differing accounts of an Israeli airstrike hit his private office. He was not there at the time. It is believed that the Israelis were sending a message that we can do this if we wish, but we choose not to. And I also believe that Trump played a role in that, in the sense that he did not want that chaotic collapse scenario that we were discussing 45 minutes ago, where the supreme leader suddenly goes at the behest of Israel, which then makes everything even worse, and probably actually leads to the Revolutionary Guard Corps having the perfect excuse by which to repress absolutely everybody and get rid of the traitors. It would achieve the opposite of what you wanted. Right, I'm going to get on to Mossad, how it operates, and look, they are still human beings like the rest of us, and bear in mind, Israel is not a large country. It doesn't have infinite resources. So what they do is they do a few things and they do them very well, whereas the CIA kind of does everything and does it very well, and the UK does quite a lot and does it very well. Mossad do a few things against their enemies. And I have met with Israeli government officials, and I have to say I disagreed with them on their analysis on several issues, and just said, I don't think that's how this works. I'm sorry, I just disagree with you. At times I was very impressed with the quality of the people I met, and at other times I was not impressed. Just like I was when I went to US think tanks or French think tanks. I don't think the Israelis are uniquely good or uniquely bad. I've lived in Israel for many years, and there are certainly things that don't work as well as they do in Europe or in America, but there are other things in their national security apparatuses that they are incredibly good at. They are technologically savvy. They have structured an economy which has driven technological innovation amongst the millennials and Gen Z, and they are reaping the benefits of that. One of my best friends in Israel actually is struggling for a job at the moment and is just teaching herself AI and will get a job in a tech firm in northern Tel Aviv very soon because they want the best and they want to be the innovators who bring the best electronic capabilities, whether that's civilian or military. I can go into a very long reason as to why October the 7th wasn't spotted, but I will try and condense this. The answer is that the Israelis did pick up patterns. What happens on the border of Gaza is that there are a series of watchtowers. They are manned all by women, only by women. The belief is that women are much better at focusing for long periods of time and notice small differences. Anyone that's married will know this. But on a serious point, they are picked because they are able to stare at screens for 10 hours at a time, not break focus. What was happening ahead of October the 7th? These young women, very capable, spotted irregularities at the border fences. They spotted that farmers were lingering a bit too long at weak points. They spotted that observation missions were being moved to sensitive areas of Israeli military activity. And this was reported. It was reported up the chain, and it was ignored by senior Israeli generals who told them that they couldn't possibly be right because the intel on the ground did not match what they were seeing. There are several accounts as to whether there were imminent warnings given 6 hours before the attack. I believe, and I understand that, at about 3 a.m, there was warning of an imminent attack. An IDF battalion went down to investigate, found nothing, and left. The other issue that happened was a force structure issue, where the highly religious settler minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, had actually requested that various forces that should be stationed along the Gaza border be moved to the West Bank because he was so pro the settlement activity that he wanted extra forces in the West Bank to support the settlement activity there. So it was a force structure issue. It was if you really want me to be honest, I think there was a bit of sexism there. I do. I really do. I think that these young women were ignored. I've lived in Israel for many years, and their gender norms do require a little bit of improvement in some areas, I have to say. It was no. It was a systemic failure for which ultimately the Prime Minister is responsible. And my hope is that Israelis will get some kind of closure to their pain by electing him out of office within the next 4 or 5 months.
I want to move on to Iran in a minute, but just one sort of quick question about Hamas, since we're in that,
yes,
in that area. Yes. And it's David Hudson's question is basically asking, would could a de facto annexation of the West Bank provoke renewed Hamas activity in the region? And I'd add to that, would that therefore have knock-on effects, or do we see that little conflict as a sideshow? Could that be a trigger for a wider?
I don't see it as a sideshow. A quarter of all illegal outposts, bear in mind there are settlements and outposts, some of which are legal under Israeli law, a lot are not legal under Israeli law. International law is a separate issue. A quarter of all illegal outposts built since Israel occupied the West Bank in 1967 were built in the last 2 years. There has been a massive uptick in settlement expansion in the West Bank. Guess what happened, everybody? Hamas became really popular in the West Bank. So Hamas are very politically legitimate actors in Palestinian politics in the West Bank. Gaza, look, I don't know many people that can go into Gaza right now to ask Palestinians in Gaza what they think about Hamas. I have not seen to date any credible sentiment analysis of how Gazans feel about Hamas. I suspect that after 2 pretty difficult years of war and a very cold winter and a wet winter this year, that they are not happy with them. But I just can't tell you. I don't know is the answer. And anybody tells you that they do know does not know, because they didn't go house to house canvassing Gazans for their opinion. They just didn't. So again, it's a little bit like those diaspora movements in Iran, when you get these very strongly opinionated people outside the conflict zone telling you how Palestinians and Israelis feel. Just check to see if they tie with what you're seeing. And my view is, I'm afraid to say, yes, I think the West Bank could be a very serious flashpoint in time to come.
A few questions about Iran. And they're a bit different, but they touch on quite a lot of your presentation. So firstly, John Mottram, he wonders how important is the youth profile, the age profile in Iran in promoting change. Okay. This is a rather different one from Glenn Warren. He says now moving into the question of change that Trump supports. So he's saying, is it more possible that on your scenarios, if the Revolutionary Guard saw a more stable future as a secular dictatorship, is that something that Trump might like the idea of, and perhaps Netanyahu not like?
Super interesting question, that. So the current generation of leaders in the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps are getting a bit long in the tooth. What do I mean? Well, most of them are war buddies from the early 80s. And they were in the trenches fighting Saddam's Iraq, and that is how they became bonded. And at the top, kind of look out for each other. But the truth is if you were, in your sort of 20s, in 1980, you're coming to the end of your working life now, and there are younger people coming up behind them who actually feel that they are the problem in the Revolutionary Guard. Now, are those younger people more prone to being secular or taking over in a sort of, I don't know, military coup that does not have religion? Yes, it's possible. But there is generational change that will have to happen, whereby some of these slightly older men, many of whom have now been killed by America and Israel, give way to Actually, what does concern me is that it does appear that the younger men coming up are more capable and more able to navigate the modern world in a way that actually some of these older guys who were, charging at Saddam's lines in kind of World War I style tactics are not. And serious lessons have been learned by the fact that they were heavily beaten across the region by Israel in particular over the last 2 years. And it'll be the younger ones who adapt and change better. Youth, I've touched on that within the Revolutionary Guard sector. It's very, very clear that younger people are losing faith in the regime. Everywhere you see it, just all over, evidenced by lack of jobs, lack of social mobility, inability to express their desires in a way which is respected by their elders. I mean, Iran is a society where age is deferred to, but not in some of the circumstances that you see today, where there was a very interesting anecdote I read about some young students, 18, 19 years old, expressing to their professor in Tehran that they were very unhappy about the situation. He said, "Why are you complaining? I grew up and we didn't even have a car in our street, and it's absolutely fine. You don't understand what this republic has done for you." And they replied back, "You stole our future from us. You stole our future." The professor was 71 years of age. These are 18, 19-year-old students. If they're saying you stole our future from us, yeah, that's not good, is it, if you're a regime cleric trying to keep control? But I come back to my point I made about lack of organization. You can be youthful and hot-headed and want to fight the whole world and fight injustice, but you've got to organize. You need resources. You need planning. How do they do that?
Can I touch on a point that was made in that previous one of those previous questions and couple it to one from David Martin? That previous question was asking whether, in broad terms, someone like Trump would feel that he could do business with a secular IRGC, whereas David Martin says, well, when the uprising was taking place, Trump threatened, and he quotes the words, "all hell would break loose," but nothing happened. So what could he have done, and might he act in the future in the light of another uprising? So on the other hand, would Trump be pro another popular uprising that you say can't be organized, or will he be say, "Oh, well, I can do business with these guys. They're not as bad as I thought."
Yeah,
if they get rid of the Ayatollahs and start to be an autocracy of a secular kind. So which do you think he would favor?
I think he'd do business with the Ayatollahs if they signed a deal with him. I don't think Trump has... I said this a year ago. I was speaking to a crowd of people. It was at a Labour conference or something. And I was asked, what will Trump do? I said, look, he is as likely to fly to Tehran and sign a deal with the Supreme Leader as he is to bomb him. And I'm not sure which one is more likely. That is Trump. I genuinely, bear in mind, he stepped across the line into North Korea and tried to do a deal with Kim Jong-un. But it's always style over substance with Trump. Does everyone know the acronym TACO? TAC. Trump always chickens out. Yeah, look. He had a chance to strike Iran in his first term. He didn't do it. He had a chance to strike Iran in his second term. He did with the nuclear program, but he didn't this time, even though he said he would. So seems like TACO is the theme of the day. But, Operation Midnight Hammer, which took out the deeply buried facility at Fordo, was an incredibly impressive military operation. Whether you believe that it was legal or not legal, or whether the Americans duped the Iranians by pretending to negotiate and then planning the strike is another matter. In terms of the capacity at Trump's fingertips, Midnight Hammer was an incredible operation to fly those B-2s over from Missouri, completely unseen across thousands of miles. And so he retains the upper hand whenever he chooses to use it. So the subtext of what I'm saying here is, if he wants to engage with them, he can, because its might is right. He's far stronger than the Iranians. Does he want to, or is he going to pick a fight in Greenland or somewhere else? Pick your problem, pick your day. Trump has not engaged in a regime change policy.
Okay. Now, I'm going to move you on to a Davos question. and you're going to earn your money twice, because I'm going to ask you to explain the question and then to answer it. So this is from Ian Brown. So he says, is there a case for adopting the ideas Mark Carney put across in Davos, and should the middle nations, inverted commas, should the middle nations start cooperating? So could you unpack that for everyone who has not listened to Mark Carney in Davos?
Does everyone know Mark Carney is the Prime Minister of Canada, who was the Governor of the Bank of England for many years, who swept to power on the back of an incredibly unpopular Liberal Party because Trump attacked Canada's sovereignty. And so the Conservatives in Canada lost a golden opportunity, and Carney came in through the back door. He basically has said what we all say at the dinner table, which is that the world is essentially dangerous, unstructured, might is right. It's time for people to stand up and club together, or stop pretending that everything's going to be okay. International institutions and the world that we live in are broken. This is no longer the post-1945 world. He was far more eloquent than me in the way that he said it, but everybody nodded. And of course, the reaction to what Carney said was, finally someone said in public what we've all been saying in private. Someone said it. The Canadians obviously are incredibly threatened by this world because their neighbor to the south is a lot larger than them. It has, threatened them several times, including Trump threatening Canadian sovereignty. So of course they see problems in this world. And Carney's solution to that is for middle-ranked powers to club together to play by the rules that existed in the post-1945 world. It's not to say that the rules were perfect. They weren't. You still had wars, you still had a Cold War, and you still had proxy battles going on. You had Korea, Vietnam, all sorts of terrible things happened, but you didn't get what you're getting now, which is great powers colliding together in a very, very chaotic way, which is what leads to world wars. And what Carney is saying is, plug. I actually wrote a paper on this in September for my consultancy Global Nation, and we are releasing an op-ed backed by the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, and Labour. That's coming out, advocating for this middle power alliance, where we argue that middle powers risk getting eaten alive by big powers unless they club together, start pooling resources, start thinking collectively about defense, start thinking collectively about security, and about protecting each other from the big wolves in the corner. And essentially what middle powers are is that they're not chickens facing wolves, they're pet dogs, right? They can bark back, they can bite, but they are not as powerful as a wolf, and 1-on-1 they will lose, but 10-on-1 may not. And so the idea that Carney is trying to say is that collective security for middle powers is the only way forward in this world and should be pursued. Now, I happen to agree with him, and I happen to have said it 4 months before he did, but I'm not the Prime Minister of Canada. But nevertheless, I just want to say that we have had a lot of support across the political parties in that. So it does appear that policymakers in the UK also agree with us. And Mr. Carney.
Just as an aside, I think it's quite an interesting question from Jeff Elliott. Do you find it chilling when any mention of Trump evokes laughter?
Oh.
Silence. It's a serious point.
Yeah. I remember giving plenty of lectures in 2016. I was not someone that predicted that he would win, but we were going through our own Brexit referendum at the time, and I understood how divisive politics can play out in societies. And I know America very well. I've spent a lot of time and I've lived in America. And I could see parallels. I could see all sorts of reasons why people would vote for Trump. And I would, go to some insurance company in Dubai and say, we have to consider what that would look like. Laughter, ha ha ha. And then, of course, he won. And, as Nigel Farage said, to the European Union, you're not laughing now. And it's a serious point, right? You didn't take me seriously. Well, 50-odd million, in fact, it was 60-something million people voted for Trump, and then in the second election, it was 71 million, and I think it was 72 million, or something around that. I mean, Trump had record numbers of people voting for him. In every demographic in the United States, he turned the dial in his favor in the last election. It is appealing to people. Now, do I think that his behavior is that of a serious man? Well, no. And I do laugh at it sometimes, and he is a bit unhinged, and there are times where I think, the Trump always chickens out thing is quite funny, particularly given that he prides himself on his manhood. But the serious point I take from this are the ideologues behind him. This hemispheric dominance idea comes from Marco Rubio. It does, Trump doesn't know what the Monroe Doctrine is. I mean, he loves the Donroe Doctrine, but I do find that funny. But what I don't find funny is the fact that there are Americans who really believe that the time of the Monroe Doctrine is back, and it's about hemispheric dominance, which led to what happened with Maduro in Venezuela. That is the serious point, which is that I take J.D. Vance seriously. I take Stephen Miller seriously. I take the hard right media outlets seriously. I take my father-in-law seriously when he repeats those things without thinking about them at the dinner table. He lives in Florida and is very much a Trump supporter. And as someone that's engaged in politics, you cannot dismiss those views, and you should never dismiss those views. Do I find it chilling, though, that he is breaking the world in such a comedic way? I mean, yes, it is a bit. But I think finally people are waking up to the reality. I mean, this Davos, yes, it is elitist, and people get rightly criticized for talking about climate change and flying in on private jets, and the elite distancing of Davos is well understood. But they finally seem to, in that elite world, realize that if they don't step up, it's going to be too late, and there will be conflict that they can't control.
One five-letter word, Trump, leads to another five-letter word, peace. And I've got several questions about that. Let's try not to make it just about Trump, but
sure.
He's obviously central to it. So I'll just read them out, and then you give us your thoughts. Jim Pilpel, and what of the Board of Peace? He puts it very simply. Linda Sherwood, what are the views of these Middle Eastern countries to the Trump Peace Council initiative signed this week? And Pete Nicholson, what influence will the new Board of Peace have on the balance of power in the Middle East? So, we're trying to give some thoughts on that. That development. At
the time of writing, and I was checking on the train just to see who had signed up to it, and most of the Middle East region has signed up to the Board of Peace. Whether they're going to pay this $1 billion signing on fee is another. I mean, it's a bit like membership in Mar-a-Lago, isn't it? You have to pay to get access to Trump. I mean, which is how politics works at the elite levels of the Republican Party. I know this because I spend a lot of time in Palm Beach, and I meet these people. And the fact that Trump is doing what he does domestically in the international arena is concerning to me, because obviously if it's pay to play, authoritarian countries will always have $1 billion down the back of the sofa, whereas I'm not sure Jordan does, I'm not sure Lebanon does. I mean, the Israelis have said they will join now. I'm not sure they have $1 billion spare at the moment. And the UK has said, well, we're not going to go because we're worried that this will put us in the same room as Putin. The actual reality of it is that you don't need a Board of Peace to solve a conflict. This feels to me more like a symbol of loyalty to Trump in the international arena, the kind that Mark Carney and Gavin Newsom, who is the governor of California, were criticizing, this kind of supine, bowing and scraping at Trump's feet while you laugh at him behind his back. But if people pay the $1 billion, they pay the $1 billion, don't they? Now, let's get to the substance of this. Can the Board of Peace solve things that international institutions cannot? Let's take Hamas. What is the biggest problem about peace in Gaza right now is the fact that Hamas won't disarm. They just have decided that if they disarm, they lose all political relevance. What does a Board of Peace do to solve that? I don't understand how the United States or Israel would be empowered to solve the problem in Gaza of Hamas with a Board of Peace there that could not be done without a Board of Peace. The problems of disarming Hamas are the same with or without that. And if you don't have that mechanism in play, Gaza still bubbles and boils away. I'm not going to talk about Ukraine much, but think about the problems that Zelensky faces. Let's say this board of peace tries to solve the problem of Ukraine. Zelensky's biggest problem is that he can't be seen to be giving up territory, thereby legitimizing the invasion. And his problem is actually his own side would take him down politically. How does a board of peace solve that? I mean, Zelensky's got to dig his heels in, surely. And the reaction to Greenland in Europe has been to spend more to defend Ukraine. So what does that board of peace bring? Or is it simply that Trump can go to an international problem and say, well, I have 20 countries behind me and you can't stop me, so I'm going to do what I want? And I think that might be what it is, rather than the solution mechanism.
Just a quick word. I think we've covered most of this in connection with Iran, but Marie Potter was wondering if you could just remind us a bit about the sanctions that were imposed on Iran. We don't want the whole story, the whole history, but you talked about the economic collapse of the country and its current collapse. To what extent is that attributable to sanctions that are currently being imposed, and would you just like to give us just a flavour of that? It's
very attributable to sanctions, and for two reasons. One is that the Iranians don't have access to the SWIFT credit system, so they can't borrow foreign currencies, and they can't issue sovereign debt and then get foreign currency in order to sort of stabilize their central bank reserves. So I don't know how they're going to control this runaway inflation, because there's just no mechanism by which they can do it. No one's going to borrow money, no one's going to lend them money under the current circumstances. And they certainly won't, let's say I had 100 iPhones to sell an Iranian. Well, I'm not going to accept Iranian currency for them, because it's going to be worth half tomorrow what I paid for it today. So what happens is you get hoarding, which then increases the problem. So sanctions play a huge role. They play a huge role in the sense that there has been a black market which grew up over years, which allowed those in power to entrench their interests at the expense of the population, which then makes things even more expensive. Think about, let's say you want to drink a bottle of whiskey. If you're a Christian in Iran, you are allowed to drink, by the way. Who imports that? By the way, I've seen this in Iraq. It's the Shia militias that do. And guess what? So you pay a fee at the airport, which the Shia militias control. You then pay a transport fee to get it to the shop for that Shia militia, who then hands it to his mate in that militia, who then adds an extra bit of fee on, right? And then it's sold at the shop. So you've already had 3 markups before you've actually bought the bottle. Those of you that like whiskey, guess how much a bottle of whiskey, a very bad bottle of Johnny Walker Black costs in Iraq? It's $100. It's a 15 quid bottle of whiskey, right? So imagine that for eggs. Imagine that for rice. Imagine that for your basic goods and service, cooking oil, phones, cars. All of a sudden, it starts to become really unsustainable, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. I just want to talk on why these sanctions came to be. There was a nuclear deal that was signed under the Obama administration. The Israelis, the Saudis, the Emiratis fiercely opposed it. They lobbied Trump heavily to break the deal. He did. And sanctions were fully reimposed by the United States in 2018, I believe. After that, Iran had kind of 2 options. The nuclear power or nuclear enrichment question became a source of regime pride, and also a potential deterrent and leverage to get it what it wanted on the international stage. So the Iranians started to actually begin to break terms of the nuclear deal, which was still enforced by the European powers. It got to the point where by last year, Iran was in violation of so many terms of that deal, and I won't go too technical, but they had essentially stopped all monitoring, which was a prerequisite of the deal being in place. They had high enriched uranium to levels unseen for civilian power. No civilian country on Earth has the amount of highly enriched uranium that Iran possesses. It's about 900 pounds of weight, half a ton, roughly. No country in history that has remained civilian with nuclear power has ever done that. The sanctions from the Europeans came straight back on, and is it any wonder that as those sanctions came back on, the Iranian rial started to spiral? Look, this is a chicken and egg question, Bill. I don't know who is more guilty on this front, but where we stand today, if I was the regime, I would start getting that high-enriched uranium back to low-enriched uranium. I would start to allow inspections back in, and things will get easier. That is their route out of this problem. I know Trump single-handedly broke the deal. We can all discuss what happened in 2018, but that's the reality of the time now. The regime has a choice. It can play ball on the nuclear file and have some of these punitive sanctions lifted.
My apologies to those of you whose questions I've not been able to put. There's many, many interesting questions that have been stimulated by tonight's speaker, but I'm going to finish with two related ones. They're sort of in the same area, it's slightly contradictory, but let's see what you can make of them, Michael. So, yes, I'll start off with John Potter's. I thought the Saudis had an enormous sovereign wealth fund, so why do you say that they've only just got 10 years left to act, if you did say that? And Jackie Hemingway, from the point of view of the superpowers, USA, Russia, China, will the Middle East matter once the oil is no longer needed?
Yeah, they do have an enormous sovereign wealth fund. It's called the Public Investment Fund. It bought Newcastle Football Club, bought many, many different investments. I have worked with people in the PIF. It's losing money. It's not making money. They have made some very aggressive strategic bets over the last year, which I was quite impressed by, particularly in the tech space. But Saudi's bank balance is not good, guys. It's really, really not good. They have massively overspent on their infrastructure programs and not seen a lot of profit from them. And the PIF is bailing the government out hand over fist to the point where the PIF is selling off some assets, and the government, yes, the government is good to service its debts. It can issue bonds, and it will honor those bonds, but you can't keep going like this forever. The Saudis are spending more money than their credit card will allow them, and at some point, they're going to have to start paying it back. They are good for now, but the warning signs are there, and if they don't reverse course pretty soon with this sovereign wealth fund bailing them out time and time again, and the Saudis might question my negative view on this, but the numbers don't lie, then in 10 years' time, it's going to be very difficult for them to have this kind of Cristiano Ronaldo, great, tourist destination come to reality. They're simply spending too much money. When the Middle East runs out of oil, which will be long after any of us have gone, including my own grandchildren, actually, if I have any. But the head of the Saudi national oil company, Aramco, in the mid-'80s said the Stone Age didn't end because the world ran out of stones. And he was right, which is it's not about Saudi running out of oil. They've got plenty of oil left. And by the way, Venezuela also does. With the Arctic melting, more is accessible. There is no shortage of supply at the moment, which is why oil sits at $60 a barrel. It's just about its utility. Now, oil will fight, right? Economies in sub-Saharan Africa, which are growing, and they will be the future of the planet in the late 21st century, will all be run on petrol-fired motor cars until they're not. I always say to people, look at a picture of New York in 1905 and then in 1915, and how many horses do you see in the picture in 1915? When the tip happens, it goes really, really fast. Now, I haven't bought an electric vehicle simply because it's not feasible at the moment, but those structural changes will happen. Your question is whether we will remain interested in the region. I would argue that interest in the region is already beginning to wane, simply because the central role that the Saudis had with global oil prices that they had in 1973 is not today. The US is a bigger producer or a bigger, at least, refiner of oil than Saudi Arabia is. So is Russia. Saudi Arabia, I think, is third at the moment. In 73, it was clearly number one. So its relative power in the global oil system is less, and its ability to define that space is less, which is why they're spending all the money they are now, because their political leverage through oil is not what it was. So interest has dipped, but Donald Trump, he is a personable guy. He likes people. These three leaders in Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia do business the way he likes to do business. That's why he likes them. And they have been smart in their investments in real estate firms and familial investment funds close to him for access. That won't last forever. And I think that it will be the case that as the world focuses more on global instability, that the instability of the Middle East will not be the central problem of the planet.
It seems to me that if you want to know what's really going on in the Middle East and to get really down into the nitty-gritty that you don't read in the newspapers and you certainly don't find on social media, you need to join Keele World Affairs and you need to come to listen to Michael Stevens. We had a superb talk, and he's shown his great authority on this subject throughout the Q&A. We benefit tonight from his pro bono appearance. There are princes and there are ministers and there are organizations that love to meet him to get these insights. We've been very lucky tonight, and I hope that we will continue to be very lucky in the future, and that Michael will keep coming here to talk to us about the Middle East. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.